You're listening to the Bold Apologia podcast. Here you can expect to find real conversation and dialogue centralized around the purpose for sharing the hope of Jesus Christ in light of theology, apologetics, and culture. We hope and believe this episode will add confidence to your faith by equipping you with boldness to share the good news of the gospel. And now, your host, Adam Parker.
Well, hello there, Bold Apologia podcast listeners, and welcome back to the Sanctify Christ as Lord series. And I'm grateful that you're joining me again as we continue our journey through this series to sanctify Christ as Lord. And over the last two episodes that we've done, we've entered into what I've been calling this exile sub-series. And in episode 32, we talked about what it means to live as a stranger in this world. We saw actually from 1 Peter that believers are actually pilgrims or sojourners. They're exiles whose ultimate citizenship is in heaven. Then, last week in episode 33, we talked about living faithfully in a hostile culture. We discussed how Christians are called to actually stand firm in truth and without becoming fearful or bitter or compromised. And honestly, today's episode builds naturally from both of those conversations, because one of the inevitable consequences of living as a faithful exile in a hostile culture is this: you will eventually be misunderstood. Not might be, not could be, but you will be. So today's episode is titled Sanctify Christ as Lord When You're Misunderstood. Now, if we're being honest, most of us don't like being misunderstood. I hate being misunderstood. Because here's the thing, we want people to understand our intentions. We want people to understand or know our hearts. We want our words interpreted correctly. We want fairness. We want accuracy. We want people to see us actually as we truly are. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that desire in itself. But the problem comes when our need to be understood becomes greater than our commitment to being faithful to Jesus. Because if you follow Christ long enough, there will be moments when people misunderstand you, no matter how clearly you explain yourself. And that's just the truth. I'm in ministry. It happens all the time. People will misunderstand you if they can. And as a pastor, I can tell you that there will be moments when people assume motives that you don't have. Moments when your convictions are misrepresented. Moments when your faithfulness is interpreted as hatred. Moments when your kindness is overlooked. Moments when your obedience costs you relationships. And in those moments, a very important question emerges. Will Christ still be Lord? Because being misunderstood has this unique way of exposing what we truly live for. If we live for approval, being misunderstood becomes unbearable. If we live for reputation, being misunderstood becomes devastating. And if we live for acceptance, being misunderstood actually becomes a crisis. But if Christ is Lord, then even when misunderstandings hurt, they don't ultimately control us. And folks, honestly, I think one of the reasons this topic is so important is because modern culture has amplified misunderstandings dramatically. Social media has made snap judgments normal. Nuance completely disappears from what we post on social media. Context disappears. People will often assume the worst. Entire identities end up being built around various labels that we come up with. And because everything moves so quickly, many people form opinions long before they understand what someone actually believes or what they stand for or who they are. And as a result, Christians like ourselves increasingly find themselves being misunderstood. Not because they're perfect, not because every criticism is false, but because biblical convictions often clash with cultural assumptions. And folks, this isn't new. This has been happening since the beginning of the church. One of the things that surprises many believers is how frequently the early Christians were misunderstood. It's quite interesting. The Roman world accused Christians of all sorts of things. Christians, believe it or not, were called atheists. They were called atheists because they refused to worship the Roman gods. They refused to worship the many gods. So they're like, you're anti-gods, right? They were accused of disloyalty because they wouldn't worship Caesar. They were viewed as strange because their values differed from the surrounding culture. And in many cases, people simply didn't understand them. And yet Peter writes to these believers and gives them remarkable counsel here in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. He says this, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." Notice what Peter says there. Not if they speak against you, but when. Peter assumes that faithful believers will sometimes be falsely accused. He assumes that they will be misunderstood. He assumes they will face criticism. And his response is just fascinating. He doesn't tell them to panic. He doesn't tell them to obsess over defending themselves against every accusation. He doesn't tell them to become bitter. He tells them to keep living honorably. That takes tremendous trust, because our natural instinct is often to fight for vindication immediately. We want to set the record straight. We want everyone to know that we're right. We want our name cleared. And sometimes there's a place for clarification, and sometimes truth requires a response. But listen, Christians must be careful not to become consumed by the pursuit of reputation. Because honestly, everyone, if we're not careful, reputation can become an idol. We can become more concerned with protecting our image than we are honoring Jesus Christ. Folks, we can become more concerned with winning arguments than displaying godliness, more concerned with being right than being faithful, and that is so dangerous, because eventually following Jesus will require choosing faithfulness over popularity, and sometimes even over understanding. Think about Jesus himself. No one has ever been more misunderstood than Jesus Christ. The sinless Son of God, Jesus Christ, was accused of being demon-possessed. He was accused of being a drunkard. He was accused of being a blasphemer. He was accused of misleading people. He was accused of crimes that he never committed. And ultimately, he was crucified between two criminals. And folks, if anyone ever deserved perfect understanding, it was Jesus. Yet, he was profoundly misunderstood. And why? Because truth often exposes darkness. And people don't always respond positively when the truth is exposing their darkness. In John chapter 1, verse 5, it says this, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness hasn't overcome it." Folks, light reveals, it exposes, and people who love darkness often resent exposure. And that's why Jesus said in John chapter 15, verse 18, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. Now hear me carefully, everybody. This doesn't mean every criticism Christians receive is persecution. I'm not saying that. Sometimes the criticism is actually deserved. Sometimes believers will speak carelessly or act foolishly or will do something in need of correction, and we should be humble enough to acknowledge that. But there's a difference between suffering because of sin and suffering because of faithfulness. Peter actually addresses this directly in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 15 through 16. He says this, but let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. Folks, that distinction matters. Christians should not seek conflict. We shouldn't go out looking for controversy. We shouldn't be trying to be offensive, okay? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we should avoid offense at all costs. That's not my point. I'm not going for the, let's be politically correct nonsense, because neither should we compromise truth simply to avoid misunderstanding. Because honestly, I think one of the greatest temptations when people misunderstand us is bitterness. Misunderstanding hurts, especially when it comes from people you love, especially when it comes from people you respect, especially when it comes from fellow believers. Some of the deepest wounds that Christians experience come not from enemies, but from friends, from church members, from ministry partners, from family friends, from people who should know better. And folks, I just want you to hear me. Those wounds can become fertile ground for bitterness if we're not careful about it. Bitterness convinces us that resentment is justified. Bitterness keeps old wounds alive. Bitterness turns pain into our new identity, and we don't want that. We want our identity in Jesus Christ. Here's what Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 warns believers about. It says, see to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. Notice that bitterness is described as a root. Roots grow, they spread, they eventually affect everything around them, and that's why believers must guard their hearts carefully. Because everyone, the enemy would love nothing more than to use misunderstanding to produce bitterness, to take a wound and turn it into cynicism, to take pain and turn it into hardness of heart, to take disappointment and turn that disappointment into unbelief. But everyone, Jesus Christ calls us to something higher. He calls us to trust him with our reputation. He calls us to trust him with our vindication. He calls us to trust him with our future. And honestly, that's not easy, but it's deeply freeing. Because when Christ is Lord, you no longer have to spend your life controlling every narrative about yourself. You no longer have to win every argument. You no longer have to correct every misunderstanding. You can actually walk faithfully, and you can trust God with what people think about you. And that doesn't mean truth doesn't matter. It means God's judgment matters more than public opinion. One of my favorite examples of this comes from David. Before becoming king, David was repeatedly misunderstood. Saul viewed him as a threat. Others questioned his motives. He was hunted and slandered and falsely accused. Yet over and over and over and over again, David entrusted himself to God rather than taking matters into his own hands. And eventually, God vindicated him. Not because David was perfect, but because God is faithful. And everyone, listen, that is a lesson many believers need to hear today. You don't have to carry the weight of vindication yourself constantly, because God sees, He knows, He understands, even when nobody else does. He knows, He sees, He understands, He loves you, He's got you covered, He gets it. And perhaps this is one of the most comforting truths in all of Scripture. People may misunderstand you, but Christ, He never does. People may misrepresent you, but Jesus Christ knows your heart. Everyone, people may question your motives, but Christ sees what others cannot. And if Christ is truly Lord, His verdict matters more than every other voice. Now, as we close today, I just want to encourage you with this. I want to encourage those of you who are carrying the weight of misunderstanding. Maybe someone has misrepresented you. Maybe your convictions have cost you relationships. Maybe you've been criticized unfairly. Maybe you've been falsely accused. Maybe you've been hurt by people who should have known better. But listen, everyone, I need you to know this. I need you to follow this. Do not allow misunderstanding to drive you away from faithfulness. Don't allow bitterness to take root. Don't allow public opinion to become your master, but instead sanctify Christ as Lord. Trust Him with your reputation. Trust Him with your pain. Trust Him with your future. And keep walking faithfully, because one day every hidden thing will be revealed. One day every false judgment is gonna be corrected. One day every misunderstanding will be brought to the light. And on that day, the opinion that matters the most will be the opinion of the King, Jesus Christ. Folks, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Sanctify Christ as Lord series. And remember, you may be misunderstood by people, but you are fully known by Jesus Christ. Folks, God bless you richly. If this episode blessed you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. I know there's people out there who need to hear these encouraging words. Once again, God bless you richly, and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Bold Apologia podcast. To find out more about Adam Parker's projects, writings, or guest podcast episodes, visit his website at www.boldapologia.com. There you can get more information regarding Adam's works, contact him to be a guest on your show, or leave him a comment for Q&A. Until next time, thank you and God bless.